The Boston Bruins. How do you describe the type of hockey season this team is having? Well, a few words come to mind, but one truly does categorize this team perfectly, and that is inconsistent. Boston has been one of the best hockey teams of the 21st century, carrying a strong culture into nearly every season and typically defying early expectations. However, this year, their stagnant play has left the entire Bruins fan base with an unfamiliar feeling of panic and uncertainty. Heading into the Four Nations face-off break, the Bruins carry a record of 27-24-6, just outside the playoff bubble despite having more games played than most of their competition. So what gives? How did a team like Boston that allegedly improved at nearly every area this offseason fall off so fast and so hard? How did they go from one of the most consistent, strong locker rooms to one that seems uncertain and lacks direction? Well, there are a lot of things under the curtain that can explain why the Boston Bruins season has gone awry. So today, let's talk about the Boston Bruins, their inconsistent patterns, their lack of depth, and the tough decisions that Boston will have to make regarding the future of this franchise. Where do we even start with this team? The Boston Bruins, without being too harsh, are having a disastrous season. And whether you want to point the finger at one person or the other, realistically, this has been in the making for years now, and Boston finally being a mediocre team was something that shouldn't be all that surprising to its fans, and I'm going to explain why. But before we do that, I just wanted to say thank you to every single person who has been watching the content lately. We just hit 20,000 subscribers on this channel, and I'm forever grateful to every single person who clicks on any of my content. So thank every single one of you. If you guys want to continue following along with my journey, go ahead and hit the like button now on this video and subscribe to the channel for more stuff like this. And with all of that sappy stuff out of the way, let's talk about how the Boston Bruins got into this position. A few days ago, I made a video praising the Dallas Stars for their system of drafting and developing players, and how they have become the model for how to build out a roster in the modern NHL. The Bruins, they feel like the exact opposite of the Stars, but have been able to mask a lot of their issues because of an aging core that just never really failed to play at a high level, even towards the end of some of these players' careers. And let me explain this a little bit better to help you understand what I mean here. The Bruins had themselves two quality centers in Patrice Bergeron and David Krejci for years. Bergeron was a point-per-game producer and arguably the best two-way center the game has ever seen. His leadership and drive was enough to inspire any locker room to compete their hardest, whether that be in May or also just a random night in January. Then there was David Krejci, a skillful playmaker with an insane hockey IQ. A guy who lifted up his line mates and was always considered a high-end second-line center through his career. With this consistency at the center position and very team-friendly deals for both of these players, Boston was able to build out a mean but talented roster around their core, allowing them to stay constant despite not having much in their farm system. But this is the problem with the Bruins. The organization as a whole was making mistakes for years. Bad drafting, some not-so-great signings, only it was all covered up by the talents that they had for decades. Notable years like the 2015 draft are what people typically reference, especially with Boston having 3 picks in the first round that were all essentially busts, outside of maybe a few solid years from Jake DeBrusk. The 2022-23 miracle season, while not feeling like it at the time, truly was Boston's final attempt to win a championship before what would ultimately be an end of an era. We all know the story by now. The Bruins would have the greatest year in hockey history, breaking the all-time wins record, only to fall short to the Panthers in the first round of the playoffs during a crushing Game 7 on home ice. That offseason, the Bruins would see both of their franchise centers in Bergeron and Krejci retire, and with limited cap space and prospects, this meant they would have to rely on guys like Charlie Coyle and Pavel Zacha to step up into those roles, and they did a pretty decent job. The Bruins relied on their defense and their goaltending tandem to get them through the season, finished second in the Atlantic Division, beat Toronto in the first round before ultimately just coming up short in the second round to the Florida Panthers, where they lost in Game 6. So you're all caught up with the past, where the Bruins were this offseason, so let's talk about the moves that they made. The Bruins finally had some cap space to sign some players and make a potential splash through free agency, and that's exactly what they did, bringing in two of the top names that year in Elias Lindholm and Nikita Zadorov. Lindholm was touted to be the next Patrice Bergeron, and funny enough, Zadorov was actually compared to Zdeno Chara at some points this offseason. It almost felt like the Bruins were ready to start a new era with these players, only it was unfair for anyone to expect these two guys to live up to the peaks of the other two Boston legends. Fans were skeptical about the moves. Neither player was truly this highly touted talent, but at the same time, everyone felt optimistic about the future of the Bruins. But fast forward a few months and the Elias Lindholm-Nikita Zadorov experiment has been less than pleasant for Boston. Zadorov, while adding size, has been a mess defensively, and is the most undisciplined player in the NHL this year, leading the league in PIM. Elias Lindholm has not quite found his offensive game, but to be fair, people's expectations for Lindholm were way too high because of the contract he signed. Elias is more of a 60-point player than an 80-point player realistically, but because of what the market was dictating at the time and the price of his contract, fans are expecting a lot more from him considering the fact that he's supposed to be the team's top-line center, and well, 60 points really isn't enough for your best center on the team. Offensively, he's on pace for less than 50 points this season, which would be less than both Zacha and Coyle's totals from last year. Lindholm has been great defensively though, helping out on the PK and just having the right spacing most of the time, but at the price that he's earning, it makes a lot of sense why there's so much of this bad aura surrounding Lindholm this year. Unfortunately, he was hyped up a little bit too much and maybe a bit overpaid for the position that the Bruins were asking him to play. It is still very early in these deals, so things could turn around, but likely we are looking at similar productions from both of these players moving forward, which, if true, could be pretty crippling for Boston. As for the rest of the roster, yeah, their goaltending has been shaky this year, but that's something that I expect to get better. Swayman had the very public negotiations, didn't have a training camp, and was thrown right into the fire behind a shaky defense that doesn't look confident in front of him. And same for Korpisalo. He went from Ottawa's system to Boston's, and now he's expected to just play well all of the sudden. I just don't really believe in that. I think the defense is really the biggest problem right now. They're playing slower, they're not being responsible with the puck, and that's starting to affect their goaltender's confidence as well. Offensively, it feels like the Bruins have a lot of good players, but no great players. Coyle, Zacha, Geekie, Frederic, Lindholm, they're all middle six guys. And outside of Pastrnak, and maybe if you consider Brad Marchand still elite, you seriously lack top-line talent. Pastrnak has over 20 points more than the rest of the players on his team. And while the fourth line has been a pleasant surprise this year, overall, the team just feels disappointing when it comes to their offense. For the deadline this year, the Bruins will likely not be in on many players since most of the top-end talent is already off the board. And with Boston needing themselves an actual top-line center and no one really being available, I imagine that the Bruins are going to most likely be sellers this year as opposed to buyers. And if they somehow manage to get into the playoffs, it will likely be as the wildcard 1 or 2 seed. So to summarize, years of poor drafting, some bad contracts, and a lack of a succession plan have been the biggest factors for the Bruins' downfall. Sprinkle in a few other small things like the Swayman negotiations going awry, or Brad Marchand, your leader, your captain, not having a new contract, and this is the result that you get. A team that has a lot of high-end talent but little to no depth, and not a lot of draft capital to help you rebuild on the fly. It's a messy situation, but the Bruins are now at a crossroads. Do they continue to try to become the Washington Capitals, rebuild enough to get yourself back into a position where you can compete again, or do you hit the reset button and rebuild with your roster? It's a tough decision, but one that Boston will have to make. But this is how the Boston Bruins got to this point. Let me know what you guys think about all of this, who you think is the most to blame, upper management, the coaching, the players, etc. Just drop your thoughts in the comments below and let's talk about this a bit more. Thank you guys as always for watching these videos. If you want to see more content like this, make sure you like this one and subscribe to the channel. I will see you guys in the next episode.